Welcome back to Alpha Women Audio Fiction, where we share stories of silent strength, unbreakable boundaries, and the cold, unyielding power of a woman who refuses to be anyone's victim. If you are listening to this and you have ever been underestimated by the very people who should have protected you, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button because this story has a closing date, and you are not going to want to miss the moment the ink dries. Disclaimer: this is a work of fiction inspired by real-world forensic accounting and toxic family dynamics. Any resemblance to actual persons is purely coincidental. But the lesson here? That is entirely real. My name is Eleanor Sterling. I am 34 years old. For the past 12 years, I have worked as a senior forensic auditor specializing in international asset recovery and corporate fraud. My job is to find the money that powerful people are trying to hide. I trace offshore accounts, untangle labyrinthine shell companies, and decode the silent language of ledgers. In my world, numbers never lie, people lie, relentlessly, creatively, and sometimes beautifully. But the math always catches them. A discrepancy of 10 cents on a balance sheet can lead to a $10 million offshore trust if you know how to pull the right thread. I pull threads for a living. I am very, very good at it. Last Tuesday, my older sister, Chloe, called to casually mention that a mutual family decision had been made regarding my property. The property in question was a sprawling, historic $12 million vineyard estate in Napa Valley, left exclusively to me by our estranged grandfather. "We've finalized the paperwork, Chloe said through the phone. Her tone was breezy, dismissive, the kind of voice you use when you are ordering a latte, not informing your sister that you are committing a felony against her. The market is peaking, and quite frankly, you can't afford the upkeep on a place like that on a bookkeeper's salary. We found a cash buyer. Quick, close in 3 weeks. We'll set up a modest trust for you from the proceeds. It's for the best." She spoke as if it was already done, as if my ownership was merely a clerical error that she, the brilliant luxury real estate agent, was kindly correcting. I held the phone to my ear, sitting in the corner office of my firm in downtown Chicago, looking out over the skyline. My desk was a sleek expanse of obsidian glass. On it sat a single silver magnifying glass, a gift from a federal judge after I helped dismantle a tri-state embezzlement ring. I picked it up, feeling the cool metal against my palm. I turned it over twice, then I smiled, a slow, quiet smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I see," I said. My voice was a flat, frictionless surface. "A cash buyer, exactly," Chloe replied, sounding irritated that I wasn't weeping with gratitude. "A massive investment group, very secretive, very wealthy. They don't want any hassle. I'm handling everything through my agency. You literally just have to sit back and let us take care of it." "Thank you, Chloe," I murmured. "You always were so proactive." She hung up, entirely convinced she had won. 34 years of being the family's scapegoat had taught me to hear the triumph in the silence after the click. She thought she had outsmarted the quiet, boring sister who wore beige cardigans to family dinners and never talked about her work. But Chloe forgot one critical detail. She didn't know what I actually do for a living. She didn't know that my bookkeeping job involved dismantling financial empires over morning coffee. And most importantly, she didn't know that the secretive, wealthy investment group buying my $12 million estate with straight cash was my own LLC. I was buying my own property back from the sister who had just forged my name on a power of attorney to steal it. And the trap I was setting would end her career, freeze her accounts, and shatter the toxic illusion my family had lived in for 3 decades. To understand how a family arrives at a $12 million fraud, you have to understand the architecture of a golden child and a scapegoat. It is a psychological structure as rigid and predictable as the financial laundering operations I tear apart for the federal government. Chloe was the golden child, 36 years old, devastatingly beautiful in that sharp, heavily maintained way. She was a luxury real estate broker who sold image more than she sold square footage. She drove a leased Porsche she couldn't afford, wore designer labels bought on maxed-out credit cards, and spoke in a breathless vocabulary of synergy and exclusive listings. To our mother, Chloe was the son. Then there was Marcus, 30 years old, the perpetual tech bro visionary. He was always one seed funding round away from becoming the next billionaire. His startups burned through cash like dry kindling. He used buzzwords instead of business models. Our mother coddled him, funding his failures by mortgaging her own home, convinced his genius was just misunderstood by the market. And then there was me, Eleanor, the middle child, the quiet one, the one who preferred puzzles to pageants. From a young age I realized that my family's economy of affection was a Ponzi scheme. Love was paid out only to those who maintained the delusion of grandeur. I refused to participate. I wore plain clothes, I spoke in facts, I went to a state university on a full academic scholarship, got my CPA, then fraud examiner, and quietly moved away. To them, I was a disappointment, a colorless drone. Eleanor is just our little calculator. My mother used to say at dinner parties, laughing sharply. She counts other people's money because she'll never have any of her own. I never corrected them. I learned early on that silence is not submission, silence is a vault. It is where you store your power while your enemies exhaust theirs in loud, meaningless noise. While Chloe was going bankrupt trying to look rich and Marcus was burning bridges in Silicon Valley, I was building an empire in the shadows. By 28, I was leading federal investigations. By 30, I started my own forensic consulting firm, contracting with international banks to trace missing funds. I invested my massive consulting fees quietly, ruthlessly. I bought commercial real estate through anonymous holding companies. I traded in municipal bonds. My net worth crossed 8 figures before my 32nd birthday. My family knew none of this. To them, I still lived in a modest apartment and filed tax returns for mid-level managers. The fracture in our family's delicate delusion occurred when my grandfather, Arthur Sterling, passed away. He was a ruthless, brilliant industrialist who had despised my mother's vanity and seen through Chloe and Marcus instantly. He and I had maintained a secret correspondence for years. We played chess via email. We discussed market volatility and the psychology of greed. He was the only one who truly saw me. When he died, his will was a localized nuclear event. He left token amounts to my mother, Chloe, and Marcus. But to me he left the crown jewel of his holdings, the Sterling estate in Napa Valley. A sprawling operational vineyard with a historic manor, appraised at a conservative $12 million. The reading of the will was a masterclass in entitlement. Chloe had actually screamed at the estate lawyer. Marcus had thrown a crystal tumbler against the wall. Our mother had looked at me with a cold, venomous hatred that I will never forget. She manipulated him, Chloe had hissed, pointing a manicured finger at me. She's a sociopath. She doesn't even drink wine. What is a glorified accountant going to do with a luxury estate? I had simply adjusted my glasses, signed the acceptance documents, and walked out of the lawyer's office without a word. For 2 years I let the estate run itself under the management team my grandfather had put in place. I visited in the quiet of winter, walking the dormant vines, feeling the deep-rooted strength of the land. It was mine, a monument to the fact that I was valued, I was seen, but my family's resentment did not fade. It fermented, it turned into a toxic, desperate acid. Chloe's real estate business was collapsing under the weight of her lifestyle. She had $750,000 liens against her. Marcus's latest crypto venture had imploded and his investors were threatening litigation. They needed capital, massive capital, and they needed it immediately. In their minds, my estate wasn't mine, it was a family asset that I was selfishly hoarding. I was just the administrative error keeping them from their rightful wealth. And so they decided to correct the error. The build-up to their crime was a slow burn, meticulously documented in my memory. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment they crossed the psychological Rubicon. It was Christmas Eve, 7 months before the forged closing. Our mother was hosting dinner at her heavily mortgaged house. I attended as I out of a clinical curiosity. I wanted to see how the disease of their entitlement was progressing. I wore a simple gray cashmere sweater, no jewelry, no makeup. I looked exactly like the person they wanted me to be. Insignificant, the dining room table was a grotesque display of faux wealth. Silver-plated chargers, imported truffles they couldn't afford, and crystal glasses filled with champagne bought on credit. Chloe sat across from me, her phone constantly buzzing with demands from creditors she was ignoring. Marcus sat next to her, nervously tapping his foot, his eyes darting. "So Eleanor," my mother said, slicing into a massive roast, "are you still doing that depressing tax work? It must be soul-crushing, staring at spreadsheets all day during the holidays." "I find it engaging," taking a sip of water. Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Engaging, right? Because balancing someone's QuickBooks is so thrilling. You know, Elle, if you ever want to make real money, I could hire you as my assistant. The commission on just one of my luxury listings is probably double your annual salary." I looked at my sister. I knew with absolute forensic certainty that her bank account was overdrawn by $6,000. I knew her Porsche was 2 months behind on payments. I didn't say it, I just offered a small, polite smile. "That's very generous of you, Chloe. But I prefer stability." "Stability is for the mediocre," Marcus interjected, leaning forward. You have to leverage assets to build wealth. You're sitting on that vineyard, doing nothing with it. It's an insulting waste of capital. If I had that equity, I could turn it into 100 million in 3 years. Yes, I said quietly, cutting a small piece of meat. I suppose you could, but you don't have it. I do. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The clinking of silverware stopped. My mother glared at me, her face tight with Botox and fury. You shouldn't have it, she snapped, dropping all pretense of holiday cheer. Your grandfather was senile, he made a mistake. That property belongs to this family, not just to you to hoard out of spite. It belongs to the person named on the deed, I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. That is how property law functions. Chloe slammed her hand on the table, making the crystal rattle. You are so arrogant. You sit there in your cheap clothes, acting like you're better than us just because you manipulated a dying old man. You don't deserve that place. You don't know how to live in that world. I placed my knife and fork precisely parallel on my plate. I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin. I didn't raise my voice. I never raise my voice. When you yell, you give away your power. When you whisper, you make them lean in to hear their own execution. Deserve has nothing to do with it, Chloe. Ownership does, and I own it. When the bill for the expensive catered dessert arrived, my mother aggressively snatched it away from me. Don't worry, Eleanor, she sneered, tossing her platinum credit card onto the silver tray. We know you can't afford this. We'll cover your meal, just like we always have to cover for your lack of ambition. I looked at the credit card. I knew it was carrying a balance of $42,000 at an 18% interest rate. I knew she was paying the minimum. Thank you, Mother, I said smoothly. I appreciate the charity. I left shortly after, but before I walked out the front door, I paused in the hallway to adjust my coat. From the dining room, I heard Chloe's voice, low and urgent. She's never going to sell it, Mom. She's too stubborn. We can't wait for her to come to her senses. Marcus's investors are threatening to go to the SEC. Then we don't wait, Marcus's voice replied, tight with desperation. She's completely checked out of the management anyway. She hasn't been to Napa in 6 months. She wouldn't even notice if a transaction was initiated. But her signature, our mother hesitated. I have her signature, Chloe said. The triumph in her tone was chilling. I have it on a dozen old birthday cards. I have it on the original estate transfer documents. It wouldn't be hard, a standard power of attorney template, a friendly notary. We get the cash, we pay off the immediate debts, we put $1 million in a trust for her so she can't say we left her destitute. It's a reallocation of family resources, it's for her own good. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, perfectly still. My breath was slow and measured, the pulse at my wrist beat at a calm, steady 60 beats per minute. They weren't just toxic anymore, they were criminal. They were actively conspiring to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Most people would have burst back into the room. Most people would have screamed, threatened to call the police, or confronted them with their betrayal. But I am not most people. I am a forensic auditor. When a suspect begins to build a fraudulent structure, you do not interrupt them. You let them build it. You let them pour the concrete of their own lies. You let them sign the documents, because intent is hard to prove in a family argument. But a signed, notarized, and filed fraudulent deed? That is a federal felony. It is permanent, it is irrevocable. I didn't say a word. I quietly opened the front door, stepped out into the freezing Chicago night, and walked to my waiting black town car. Where to, Misters? My driver asked. Take me home, David, I said, looking out at the glittering city lights. I have some accounting to do. The mechanism of a real estate fraud is surprisingly fragile. It requires a chain of complicit or incompetent actors, a desperate seller, a willing notary, an unobservant title clerk, and a buyer who doesn't ask too many questions. My family had 3 of those 4 elements. They lacked the 4th because they had severely misjudged their target. The official confirmation of their plot arrived on a Tuesday 4 weeks after the Christmas Eve dinner. I was in my office analyzing a complex web of shell companies tied to a sanctioned oligarch when my private line rang. It was David Vance, a senior partner at the prestigious law firm that handled my estate planning. David was not a man who called to chat. He billed at $1,400 an hour. Eleanor, his voice was gravelly, devoid of pleasantries. Did you authorize a power of attorney to your sister, Chloe Vance, to sell the Sterling estate? I stopped typing. The cursor on my dual monitors blinked, a steady rhythmic pulse in the silence of my office. I looked out the window at the gray Chicago sky. I did not, David, I replied evenly. I didn't think so, he said, the sound of papers shuffling in the background. A title company in California just flagged a preliminary title report for the property. A listing agreement was signed yesterday, $12 million. The seller is listed as Eleanor Sterling, represented by Chloe Vance, attorney-in-fact. The listing agency is Chloe's own firm. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. The audacity was almost breathtaking. Not only was Chloe stealing my $12 million estate, she was doing it through her own agency so she could collect the standard 6% broker's commission. $720,000 in commission for selling a property she was actively stealing. It was so brazen it bordered on pathological. Do not flag it, I told David, my voice completely smooth. Do not issue a cease and desist. Do not contact the title company. There was a pause on the line. David was a formidable attorney, a man who built legal fortresses. He didn't like leaving doors open. Eleanor, if we don't halt this, she could execute the sale. I know, I said. That is precisely what I want her to do. You want her to sell your grandfather's estate? He asked, incredulous. No, David, I want her to think she is selling it. I need you to set up an anonymous LLC in Delaware by the end of the day. Name it Obsidian Holdings, capitalize it with $12 million from my primary investment trust. Then I need you to contact the listing agent, my sister, through a proxy buyer's agent. Submit a full price, all cash offer, no contingencies, no inspection day close. David was silent for 5 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with a quiet, profound respect. You're going to buy your own property back. I am going to let my sister commit a Class D felony in front of a room full of witnesses, a notary and a title officer. I am going to let her sign the forged transfer documents. And then I am going to introduce myself to the room. It's a beautiful trap, Eleanor, David said softly. But it's going to destroy your family. My family destroyed itself, David, I replied. I am merely conducting the audit. The following week I needed physical evidence of the forgery. In a court of law, intent is everything. A forged signature can sometimes be argued as a misunderstanding or an implied verbal consent if the defense attorney is slick enough. I needed proof that this was premeditated, practiced, and maliciously executed. I decided to pay my sister a visit at her luxury real estate boutique in the Gold Coast district. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The office was an exercise in minimalist pretension: white marble floors, fiddle-leaf figs, and an espresso machine that cost more than my first car. Chloe was sitting behind a glass desk, yelling at her assistant about a delayed floral arrangement. When she saw me walk in wearing my standard beige trench coat and flat shoes, her expression immediately soured. I was a stain on her aesthetic. Eleanor, she sighed, waving the terrified assistant away. What are you doing here? I'm incredibly busy. I have a showing for a penthouse in 20 minutes. I was in the neighborhood, I said mildly, taking a seat in the impossibly uncomfortable modernist chair opposite her. I just wanted to drop off Mom's birthday present so you could give it to her at dinner tonight. I'm working late and won't be able to make it. Chloe rolled her eyes, taking the small wrapped box. Of course you are, always crunching those numbers. You know, you really should try to live a little. Elle, you're going to wake up at 50 and realize you've done nothing but stare at spreadsheets. I find my work very rewarding, I said as she leaned back to place the gift on a side table. Her elbow knocked over a stack of files. Papers cascaded onto the floor, fanning out across the white marble. Ugh, perfect, Chloe muttered, dropping to one knee to gather them. Let me help, I offered, immediately sliding off my chair. My eyes are trained to scan thousands of lines of data per minute, looking for anomalies. It took me less than a second to process the paper that had landed near my shoe. It was a standard state of California power of attorney form. But it wasn't the legal document that held my attention. It was the scrap piece of legal paper attached to it with a paperclip. On it were 25 attempts at my signature: Eleanor Sterling, Eleanor Sterling, Eleanor Sterling. The first 5 were shaky, the loops too wide, the slant wrong. By the 15th attempt it was getting closer. By the 25th attempt it was nearly identical to my actual signature. But what truly solidified the criminal intent was the note scrawled in Chloe's distinct handwriting in the margin next to the final attempt. Close enough. Use this one. My heart did not speed up, my breathing did not change. A forensic auditor does not react when she finds the smoking gun. She simply bags the evidence. As Chloe grumbled about the mess, her back turned to me. I smoothly slid the scrap paper from the clip, folded it into a tiny square and slipped it into the pocket of my trench coat. I handed the rest of the file back to her. Here you go, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. Thanks, she huffed, tossing the file onto her desk, completely oblivious to the fact that her freedom had just vanished into my pocket. Look, I really have to run. I have a massive deal closing in a few weeks. It's going to change everything for Marcus and me. You wouldn't understand the scale of it, probably not. I agreed, standing up. Good luck with your closing. Chloe, I walked out of the boutique, the air crisp against my face. In my pocket, the folded paper felt heavier than gold. It was the control point, the anchor of the prosecution. She hadn't just signed my name. She had practiced it. 25 times. A week later, the proxy buyer's agent submitted the offer from Obsidian Holdings. $12 million, cash, 30-day close. I received the update from David while I was having a quiet dinner alone in my penthouse. I watched the city lights flicker as he relayed the details. She accepted it immediately, David reported, didn't even try to negotiate or start a bidding war. She just saw the cash and lunged for it. She signed the acceptance letter using the forged power of attorney. Eleanor Sterling by Chloe Vance, attorney-in-fact. The desperation is making her sloppy, I noted, sipping my sparkling water. Has she scheduled the closing? November 12, 10 a.m. at a title company in downtown Chicago. We insisted on an in-person closing for the final document execution, citing the buyer's strict corporate policy. Perfect, the trap was fully set, the jaws were open, waiting for the prey to step inside. But before the trap could snap shut, I had to endure one final performance. Marcus's engagement party was held 2 weeks before the closing date. He was marrying a woman named Jessica, an influencer whose entire personality consisted of beige aesthetics and sponsored content. The party was held at a lavish rented loft in the West Loop. It was catered with an open bar and a string quartet. It easily cost $40,000, money Marcus absolutely did not have. I arrived wearing a simple black dress, blending into the background like a shadow. The room was loud, filled with forced laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes. I stood near the edge of the room, observing the family dynamics. Chloe was holding court near the bar, looking triumphant. She was wearing a new diamond tennis bracelet, undoubtedly bought on the anticipation of her $700,000 commission. Marcus was loudly boasting to a group of his skeptical investors about a massive influx of capital that was about to hit his accounts, allowing his startup to scale globally. My mother was glowing, accepting congratulations as if she were the one getting married. When she saw me, her smile tightened. "Eleanor," she said, approaching with a glass of champagne. "You actually made it. I thought you'd be too busy balancing someone's checkbook." "It's Marcus's engagement," I replied neutrally. "I wouldn't miss it." "Well, try to look happy," she scolded in a low voice. "This is a big moment for our family. Marcus is finally getting the funding he deserves. And Chloe's business is booming. They are taking this family to the next level, is that so?" I asked, my tone perfectly blank. "Yes," my mother snapped, "because unlike some people, they have ambition. They aren't content to just sit on their assets and do nothing while their family struggles. They know how to make things happen." She was practically glowing with the secret knowledge of their theft. She felt so vastly superior to me, completely unaware that she was standing on a trapdoor, and my hand was resting on the lever. Later in the evening, Marcus stood on a chair to give a toast. He raised his glass, his face flushed with alcohol and unearned arrogance. "To family," Marcus shouted over the crowd. "To the people who support you, who have your back, and who understand that sometimes you have to make bold moves to secure the future. We have some incredible things happening in the next few weeks. A massive victory for the Vance family, to new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Chloe echoed loudly, catching my eye from across the room. She smiled at me, a smug, pitying smile. I raised my glass of sparkling water. I looked at my brother, drowning in debt and delusion. I looked at my sister, wearing stolen anticipation on her wrist. I looked at my mother, enabling their destruction, and then I smiled back, a genuine, terrifying smile. "To new beginnings," I thought. "Enjoy the champagne, Marcus. It's the last glass you'll drink as a free man." The final 2 weeks before the closing were an exercise in supreme surgical discipline. In forensic auditing, the actual confrontation is merely the final punctuation mark at the end of a very long, very complex sentence. The real work is done in the silence before the storm. It is the meticulous gathering of data, the cross-referencing of timelines, the building of a timeline so impenetrable that defense attorneys weep when they see it. I did not weep. I worked. My first target was the notary. A forged power of attorney requires a notarized stamp to be recognized by a title company. I needed to know how Chloe had bypassed this fundamental security measure. Using my firm's investigative resources, which are extensive and perfectly legal, I ran a background check on the notary whose stamp appeared on the fraudulent POA. His name was Gregory Vance, a distant cousin on my father's side who ran a failing strip mall insurance agency in the suburbs. Gregory had a gambling problem, a severe one. His public record showed 2 recent tax liens and a civil judgment for unpaid debts. He was the perfect mark for a bribe. I didn't confront Gregory, I didn't need to. I simply subpoenaed his bank records through an expedited request tied to my LLC's legal team, citing potential fraud in an upcoming multi-million-dollar real estate transaction. The records showed a cash deposit of $5,000 made 3 days after the power of attorney was allegedly signed. The withdrawal of that exact amount. It came from Chloe's business account. It was beautifully, tragically stupid. She had left a paper trail a mile wide. Next, I focused on the property valuation and the listing agreement. Chloe had listed the Sterling estate for an even $12 million. But she had made a critical, arrogant error. She had used an outdated appraisal from 4 years ago to justify the price to the buyer. She hadn't bothered to order a new survey or a new environmental assessment. If she had, she would have discovered that the municipal zoning laws had recently changed, reclassifying a significant portion of the estate's acreage for commercial luxury development. The true market value of the estate was no longer $12 million. It was closer to $18 million. She wasn't just stealing from me, she was grossly undervaluing the asset out of pure laziness and desperation for a quick cash close. It was professional malpractice layered on top of criminal fraud. The state licensing board was going to have a field day with her. I compiled all of this into a pristine white binder. Page 1, the fraudulent power of attorney. Page 2, the scrap paper from Chloe's office with the 25 practice signatures. Page 3, a forensic handwriting analysis report from an independent expert confirming with 99.9% certainty that the signature on the PO was not mine but was executed by Chloe Vance. Page 4, the bank record showing the $5,000 bribe to the notary. Page 5, the listing agreement signed by Chloe committing fraud to earn a commission on stolen property. Page 6, the financial dossiers of both Chloe and Marcus, detailing their crippling debts and providing the undeniable motive for the crime. The binder was 3 inches thick. It was not a defense, it was a weapon of mass financial destruction. The morning of November 12th arrived crisp and cold. The sky over Chicago was a brilliant, unforgiving blue, the kind of sky that makes the city look like it is carved out of ice and steel. I woke up at 5 a.m. I did not feel anxious. I felt the deep cold clarity that settles over me right before I dismantle a fraudulent corporate structure. My heart rate was a steady 58 beats per minute. I showered, the hot water washing away any lingering traces of the scapegoat sister. Today I was not Eleanor, the boring bookkeeper. Today I was Eleanor Sterling, senior forensic auditor, owner of the Sterling estate and the architect of their ruin. I dressed with absolute precision. I bypassed the beige cardigans and the shapeless slacks. Instead, I put on a tailored charcoal gray wool suit from a boutique in Milan. It fit flawlessly, functioning as modern armor underneath a crisp white silk blouse. I wore black leather pumps that clicked sharply on the hardwood floor. I pulled my hair back into a severe sleek twist at the nape of my neck. I looked in the mirror. The woman looking back was not someone you dismissed. She was not someone whose meal you paid for out of pity. She was the executioner. I picked up the white binder. Its weight was deeply satisfying. I placed it in my black leather briefcase alongside the silver magnifying glass my grandfather had given me years ago. A reminder of the man who had seen my worth when my family had only seen a target. At 9, received a text from David, my attorney. We are in place. The title officer is prepped. The room is secure. I replied with a single word: executing. I walked out of my penthouse, took the private elevator down to the garage and got into the back of my waiting town car. The title company on LaSalle Street, David, I told my driver. Yes, Miss Sterling, he replied, pulling smoothly into the morning traffic. I watched the city roll by, my hands resting lightly on the briefcase in my lap. I thought about the Christmas Eve dinner. I thought about Chloe calling me a glorified calculator. I thought about my mother snatching the bill away. I thought about Marcus toasting to new beginnings. They had built their entire identities on the foundation of my perceived insignificance. Today that foundation was going to crumble, and they were going to fall into the abyss they had dug for me. The offices of Premier Title and Escrow were located on the 42nd floor of a sleek glass tower on LaSalle Street. The reception area was hushed, smelling of expensive coffee and leather bindings. It was the kind of environment where fortunes changed hands quietly, behind closed oak doors. The closing was scheduled for Conference Room B, a large space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. I arrived at 9:45 a.m., but I did not go to the conference room. I went to a small private viewing office that David had reserved for me down the hall. From there, I could monitor the proceedings via a closed-circuit audio feed that David had arranged with the title company's compliance officer. At 9:50 a.m. I heard the conference room door open over the audio feed. Wow, Chloe's voice floated through the speaker, breathless and excited. This is a great space, very premium, only the best for a $12 million close. Marcus replied, his voice practically vibrating with greed. Did they say when the buyer's reps are arriving? Any minute now, Chloe said, the sound of a leather portfolio unzipping echoing over the feed. I have all the seller documents prepped, the POA is right here on top. God, I can't wait for this to be done. The wire transfer should hit our accounts by 2 p.m. today. I've already told the investors the capital is secured, Marcus boasted. And you're clearing the liens. Of course, Chloe scoffed. And buying a new Porsche, that lease is killing me. Mom is going to be so thrilled when we tell her the relocation is complete. I sat in the small viewing room, my hands folded on the table. Listening to them divide the spoils of my inheritance was like listening to thieves bicker over the price of a stolen painting. There was no guilt, there was no hesitation, there was only the ravenous consuming hunger of entitlement. At 10 a.m. sharp, the door opened again. Good morning, David's voice filled the room, deep and authoritative. I am David Vance, legal counsel representing the Obsidian Holdings LLC. This is Miss Eris, the title officer overseeing the transaction. Hi David, Chloe Vance, my sister chirped, laying on her professional charm. So wonderful to meet you. I am the listing agent and the attorney-in-fact for the seller. My sister Eleanor Sterling. This is our brother Marcus, he's just here for moral support. A pleasure, David said, his tone utterly neutral. Shall we begin? My client is eager to finalize the transfer. Absolutely, Chloe agreed eagerly. I have the power of attorney right here. You'll see it's fully notarized and compliant with California and Illinois state laws. Thank you, the title officer, Ms. Aris said. I could hear the rustle of paper as she examined the forged document. Ms. Aris was a veteran title officer. She knew exactly what was happening. David had briefed her compliance department the day before. She was playing her part flawlessly. This appears to be in order. We will proceed with the closing disclosures and the deed of transfer. For the next 20 minutes I listened to the sound my sister committing felony after felony. Sign here please, Ms. Vance, as attorney-in-fact, Ms. Aris directed. Scratch. The sound of Chloe forging my legal authority, and initial here to confirm the disbursement of funds. Scratch, the sound of Chloe directing $12 million into her own controlled accounts. And finally, the warranty deed. This legally transfers the title of the Sterling estate from Eleanor Sterling to Obsidian Holdings LLC. Please sign your name, followed by as attorney-in-fact for Eleanor Sterling. There was a brief pause. I imagined Chloe looking at the document, the final hurdle between her and the money. I imagined the triumphant smile on her face. Scratch, excellence. Era said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave. The documents are executed, the seller's obligations are complete. Fantastic, Chloe breathed, a genuine laugh escaping her. So when can we expect the wire confirmation? There's just one final step, David interjected smoothly. My client, the sole owner of Obsidian Holdings LLC, has a strict policy of personally reviewing the executed deed before authorizing the release of funds. They are in the building. Oh. Chloe sounded surprised but not alarmed, a little unusual for an anonymous LLC, but sure. Whatever the buyer wants, are they coming in? Yes, David said. In the viewing room I stood up, I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal suit. I picked up my black leather briefcase. I walked out of the room and down the carpeted hallway. My footsteps made no sound. I reached the heavy oak door of conference room B. I did not knock. I simply turned the brass handle and pushed the door open. The room was bathed in morning sunlight. David stood at the far end of the table, his face an impassive mask. Eris sat beside him, her hands neatly folded over the stack of freshly forged documents. And there, sitting on the opposite side of the massive mahogany table, were Chloe and Marcus. Chloe was wearing a bright white designer blazer, a pen still clutched in her manicured hand. Marcus was leaning back in his leather chair, a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face. They both turned to look at the door as it opened. For a second, the visual input didn't align with their expectations. They were expecting a mysterious billionaire, an eccentric corporate raider, a faceless executive. Instead, they saw me, but they didn't see the Eleanor they knew. They didn't see the beige cardigan or the slumped posture. They saw a woman in a custom Italian suit standing with the terrifying posture of an apex predator who had just locked the cage. Eleanor, Chloe whispered, her voice cracking instantly. The pen slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the mahogany table. Marcus jerked upright, his chair squeaking loudly in the sudden suffocating silence. What the hell are you doing here? He demanded, his voice defensive, panicky. You're not supposed to be here, this is a private closing. I didn't answer immediately. I walked slowly to the head of the table. I placed my black briefcase on the polished wood. The thud was heavy, definitive. I looked at Chloe, the color was draining from her face, leaving her spray tan looking orange and sickly. I looked at Marcus, the vein in his forehead suddenly visible. I smiled, the cold, frictionless smile of an auditor who has just found the missing zero. Good morning, Chloe. Good morning, Marcus, I said, my voice projecting effortlessly across the large room. I understand you are looking for the sole owner of Obsidian Holdings LLC. Chloe's mouth opened but no sound came out. Her eyes darted wildly from me to David, to the title officer, and back to me. What? Marcus stammered, his bravado shattering like cheap glass. No, that's a corporate buyer, that's an investment group. I reached up and unclasped my briefcase. Obsidian Holdings LLC is a Delaware corporation registered 3 weeks ago. My tone analytical, devoid of any familial warmth. It was capitalized with $12 million from the Sterling Primary Trust. A trust of which I am the sole beneficiary, I am the managing member, I am the sole owner. I am the buyer. The silence in the room became absolute. It was the heavy, crushing silence of a deep-sea trench. You could physically feel the pressure of the realization crushing them. You, Chloe finally gasped, clutching the edge of the table as if the room were spinning. You bought your own house. I allowed you to sell my house to me, I corrected her gently. There is a significant legal distinction, this is insane. Marcus yelled, slamming his hand on the table, trying to summon outrage to cover his terror. You can't do this is some kind of trick. You don't have $12 million in cash. I looked at my brother with a mixture of pity and clinical detachment. Marcus, my consulting firm's annual retainer with the federal government is larger than your entire imaginary startup valuation. I have significantly more than $12 million. But that isn't the issue at hand. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the thick white binder. I set it on the table. The issue at hand, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register, is what you just did in this room. I opened the white binder. Let's review the transaction, shall we? I said, turning to the first page. You presented a power of attorney granting you, Chloe Vance, the authority to sell the Sterling estate on my behalf. You claimed I signed this document. You did. Chloe squeaked, her voice thin and reedy. You told me verbally that you wanted me to handle it. You said it at Christmas. I slowly turned my head and looked at her. It was the look I reserve for executives who try to hide millions in offshore shell companies and claim it was an accounting error. We both know that is a lie, Chloe, but more importantly, the law knows it is a lie. Verbal consent does not execute a California real estate transfer. Only a notarized signature does. I turned to the second page of the binder. I slid the scrap paper out from the plastic sleeve and laid it flat on the mahogany table. Chloe looked at it, her eyes dilated in pure, unadulterated horror. This, I said quietly. Tapping the paper, is the scrap sheet from your office printer tray. The one you dropped when I visited you. It contains 25 practice attempts of my signature. And your handwritten note. Close enough, use this one. Chloe shrank back into her chair as if the paper were radioactive. She opened her mouth, closed it, and stared at the table. Her silence was a confession. Marcus jumped up. That proves nothing. Anyone could have written that. That is exactly what a defense attorney would say, David interjected, his voice calm and lethal. Which is why Ms. Sterling commissioned an independent forensic handwriting analysis. I turned to the third page. The analysis confirms with a 99.9% certainty that the signature on the power of attorney was forged by the same hand that wrote the practice signatures. Your hand, Chloe, and the notary, Marcus demanded, pointing a trembling finger at me. The notary stamped it. It's a legal document. Gregory Vance, I said, turning to the fourth page. Your distant cousin with the gambling problem. I subpoenaed his bank records. He deposited $5,000 in cash 3 days after he supposedly witnessed me signing this document in California while I was, in fact, in a federal courtroom in Chicago. The withdrawal for that $5,000 came directly from your business account, Chloe. The silence in the room returned heavier than before. It was the silence of a trapped animal realizing the cage is not only locked but suspended over a cliff. You bribed a notary, I continued, my voice steady, relentless. You forged my signature. You committed identity theft. You committed wire fraud by attempting to execute this transaction across state lines. And, I turned to the fifth page, you committed professional malpractice by acting as the listing agent on a property you were actively stealing. intentionally undervaluing the asset by $6 million because you failed to check the updated municipal zoning laws. Wait, what? Marcus spun around to glare at his sister. $6 million, you undervalued it by $6 million. Even in the face of federal prison, Marcus's primary concern was the money they had left on the table. It was a staggering display of pathological greed. Shut up, Marcus. Chloe shrieked, tears finally spilling over her heavy mascara. She turned to me, her hands clasped in front of her. Eleanor, please, we were going to give you a trust. We weren't going to leave you with nothing. We just needed the capital. You don't understand the pressure we are under. I understand pressure perfectly, I replied, my voice chillingly calm. I dismantle international fraud syndicates for a living. I sit across from billionaires who threaten my life to protect their assets. You are not under pressure, Chloe. You are under the weight of your own incompetence and vanity. We're family, Marcus yelled, slamming his hands on the table again. You're really going to do this to your own family? Over a house you don't even use? I looked at my brother. The house is irrelevant, Marcus. The theft is what matters. You stood in a room 2 weeks ago and toasted to new beginnings. You toasted to the money you were stealing from me, while I stood in the same room, watching you. You thought I was weak because I am quiet. You thought I was stupid because I don't wear designer labels. You mistook my silence for submission. I placed my hands flat on the table and leaned forward slightly. Just because I was silent does not mean I was not preparing. It just means I was letting you build the case against yourself. David stepped forward. He placed his hands on the back of the empty chair next to me. For the record, David announced, his voice filling the room, the documents executed today constitute the completion of a fraudulent real estate transaction. Every signature Chloe Vance placed on those documents is a separate count of forgery, a Class D felony in the state of Illinois carrying a penalty of 2 to 5 years per count. The attempt to transfer funds across state lines constitutes federal wire fraud, which carries a penalty of up to 20 years. Chloe began to hyperventilate, short, panicked gasps of air. The designer blazer suddenly looked like a straitjacket. Furthermore, David continued, turning his gaze to Marcus. As a knowing participant who stood to benefit financially from the fraud, and who was present for the execution of the forged documents, you, Marcus Vance, can be charged as a co-conspirator under the RICO Act, given the organized nature of the bribery and forgery. Marcus's legs gave out. He collapsed back into his chair, fists entirely devoid of blood. The golden child, the tech visionary, reduced to a trembling, silent mess. Imzaris, David said, turning to the title officer, please ensure that all original executed documents are immediately sequestered and placed in a secure safe. They are now evidence in a federal investigation. Of course, Mr. Vance, Ms. Aris said calmly, gathering the papers and sliding them into a heavy manila envelope. She sealed it and signed her name across the flap. I closed the white binder. I placed the silver magnifying glass on top of it. You wanted my money, I said to them, my voice barely above a whisper yet commanding the entire room. You wanted to reallocate family resources, consider them reallocated. I picked up my briefcase. I did not look at them with anger. I did not scream. I did not demand apologies. Apologies are for mistakes. Forgery is a decision. I turned and walked toward the door. Eleanor. Chloe screamed, a raw primal sound of absolute terror. Eleanor, please don't walk away. You can't do this. Mom will die when she finds out. You're destroying the family. I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob. I didn't look back. I simply spoke to the wood of the door. I didn't destroy the family. Chloe, I said smoothly, I just audited it. The math didn't add up. I opened the door and walked out. I walked down the carpeted hallway, to the elevators and out into the crisp Chicago morning. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had the documents. I had the property. I had my peace. The aftermath of a collapsed fraud is always messy, but it is a mess I am highly trained to navigate. Before the end of the day, David's firm had filed emergency injunctions freezing all of Chloe and Marcus's bank accounts. When you are under investigation for federal wire fraud, the government takes a very keen interest in your assets. My mother called me at 4 p.m. that afternoon. I answered on the first ring, putting her on speakerphone in my office while I reviewed a new case file. Eleanor, my mother's voice was hysterical, shrill, and laced with absolute panic. What have you done? Chloe is at my house. She's completely inconsolable. Her accounts are frozen. Marcus says he's going to be arrested. What kind of monster are you to do this to your own brother and sister? I didn't forge the documents, Mother, I replied calmly, signing my name to a report. I didn't bribe the notary. I didn't attempt to steal $12 million. It's a fam property. She shrieked, we were going to make sure you were taken care of. You didn't have to call the lawyers and the authorities. We could have handled this internally. You did handle it internally, I said. You planned it at your dining room table. I am handling the consequences externally. The matter is out of my hands. It is with the federal prosecutor now. You vindictive, selfish girl, my mother spat, her voice dripping with venom. You planned this, you trapped them, you always were a cold, calculating machine, you never loved this family. I stopped writing, I looked at the phone. You are absolutely right, mother, I said, my voice dropping to a temperature of absolute zero. I am calculating, and my calculations told me that my family viewed me as a resource to be exploited. Not a person to be loved. You chose your golden children. Now you can watch them tarnish. I hung up. I blocked her number. I blocked Chloe's number. I blocked Marcus's number. I severed the toxic lines of communication with the precision of a surgeon cutting out a malignancy. Within 2 months, the investigation was complete. Chloe's real estate license was permanently revoked by the state board. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she took a plea deal. 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of forgery. She was sentenced to 36 months in a federal minimum security facility and ordered to pay massive fines that bankrupted her completely. Her Porsche was repossessed, her luxury life evaporated. Marcus also took a plea deal to avoid the conspiracy charges. He received 5 years of probation and was permanently barred from serving as a director or officer of any publicly traded or venture-backed company. His investors pulled out, his startup collapsed, and he was forced to move back into our mother's heavily mortgaged house. My mother is now drowning in debt, trying to support her disgraced son and pay the legal fees for her imprisoned daughter. She lost her social standing, her country club membership, and the illusion of her perfect family. As for me, I kept the vineyard. I actually transferred the title back to my own name. I visit it twice a year, walking the vines in the quiet mornings, watching the sunrise over the Napa Hills. I expanded my forensic auditing firm. We now have offices in London and Dubai. My net worth continues to grow, quietly, steadily, in the shadows where real power resides. There is a profound lesson in the architecture of silence. Society tells women that we must be loud to be heard, that we must fight back with fiery words and dramatic confrontations. But that is a lie designed to make us exhaust ourselves. True power does not scream. True power observes. It gathers data. It builds a structural trap of undeniable facts. When people underestimate you, when they assume your quiet nature is a sign of weakness, let them believe they are the smartest people in the room. Let them forge the documents. Let them sign their own names to their own destruction. And when the trap snaps shut, when the cold, hard reality of the math catches up to their lies, you don't need to yell. You just need to place the binder on the table, smile, and walk away. They will destroy themselves. You just have to be patient enough to watch. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to sit in silence while someone took credit for your work or tried to steal your peace, let me know in the comments below. What was your walk-away moment? Subscribe to Alpha Women Audio Fiction for more stories of quiet strength and cold, calculated justice. Keep your boundaries firm, keep your receipts organized, and never apologize for the space you take up. I will see you in the next one. You might think that is the end of the story. The legal verdicts are handed down, the prison sentences are served, and the protagonist rides off into the sunset. But life, especially life after escaping a toxic family, is rarely that simple or that abrupt. Recovery is a long-term audit. It requires reconciling years of emotional deficits and rebuilding your psychological balance sheet from the ground up. In the months following the closing room confrontation, the silence in my life was profound. For 34 years I had lived with the constant low-level static of my family's demands, their criticisms, and their frantic financial emergencies. When that noise was suddenly removed, the quiet was almost deafening. It takes time to learn how to live in the quiet without waiting for the next crisis. I spent the summer at the Sterlington Napa Valley. I took a sabbatical from my firm, leaving the day-to-day operations to my junior partners. For the first time in my life, I didn't open a spreadsheet for 6 weeks. I woke up at dawn. I walked the endless rows of grapevines, feeling the dry California soil beneath my boots. I watched the fog roll in over the hills, a thick gray blanket that muffled the sounds of the world. My grandfather's library became my sanctuary. It was a massive room lined with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, filled with first editions on history, economics, and philosophy. He had spent his final years in this room, reading, thinking, and planning. He had understood the true nature of his daughter and his other grandchildren. He had known they would squander his legacy if given the chance. One afternoon, while organizing a stack of his old correspondence, I found a letter he had written but never mailed. It was addressed to me, dated 3 months before he died. My dearest Eleanor, the letter read in his sharp, slanted handwriting. If you are reading this, I am gone and the estate is yours. I know the storm this will cause, I know your mother and your siblings will descend upon you like vultures. But I chose you because you are the only one with the spine to withstand them. You have my analytical mind, but more importantly, you have the discipline of silence. The world rewards the loud, but it is ruled by the quiet. Protect the estate, protect yourself, and never let their chaos disrupt your calculations. With profound respect, grandfather, I held the letter in my hands, tears welling in my eyes for the first time since this entire ordeal began. It wasn't sadness, it was the overwhelming relief of being validated, of knowing that someone I respected had seen my worth, even when the people who shared my DNA had only seen a scapegoat. The estate thrived under my ownership, not because I was a brilliant vintner, but because I knew how to hire brilliant people and get out of their way. We rebranded one of our vintage lines, launching a premium reserve called the Obsidian Blend. It was a subtle inside joke that no one but me and David, my attorney, understood. It sold out within 3 weeks of its release. While I was building, my family was continuing to unravel. My firm's network is vast and the financial world is surprisingly small. Occasionally, I would receive updates on their status, not because I sought them out, but because their failures were public record. And Chloe's descent was the steepest. When she was released from the minimum security facility after serving 2.5 years, she entered a world that no longer had a place for her. A felony conviction for forgery and wire fraud is a permanent red flag in any industry, but in real estate it is an absolute death sentence. She could not get a license, she could not work in finance, banking, or any field requiring fiduciary trust. She ended up taking a job as an administrative assistant at a logistics company. The irony was not lost on me, the sister who had mocked me for being a boring bookkeeper, who had offered to hire me as her assistant so I could make real money, was now answering phones and filing paperwork for minimum wage. I don't recount their failures with joy. There is no joy in watching a family destroy itself. There is only a clinical, forensic acknowledgement of cause and effect. They made choices based on greed, entitlement, and a fundamental underestimation of the woman they were targeting. The universe simply balanced the equation. My life, on the other hand, expanded in ways I had never anticipated. I returned to Chicago in the fall, fully recharged. My firm took on a massive, high-profile case assisting the Department of Justice in tracking down billions in stolen cryptocurrency. The work was complex, exhausting, and deeply fulfilling. I was no longer hiding my success. I moved out of my modest apartment and purchased a sprawling, modernist penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. I stopped wearing the beige cardigans. I embraced the armor of custom tailoring. I walked into federal courtrooms and corporate boardrooms with the absolute certainty of a woman who knows exactly what she is capable of. The experience with my family fundamentally changed how I view conflict. I used to believe that avoiding conflict was a sign of peace. I know now that avoiding conflict with toxic people is merely a postponement of the inevitable war. They will cross your boundaries because they believe your boundaries are negotiable. They will take what is yours because they believe you lack the strength to defend it. You must teach them otherwise. You do not teach them by screaming. You do not teach them by engaging in endless, circular arguments where they gaslight your reality and manipulate your emotions. You teach them with consequences, cold, hard, undeniable consequences. If you are listening to this, and you are the scapegoat of your family, I want you to hear this very clearly. Your value is not determined by their inability to see it. Your worth is not tied to their approval. They may call you cold, they may call you unfeeling, they may call you a calculator. Let them use whatever vocabulary they need to comfort themselves while you quietly, methodically build your empire. Document everything, trust your instincts, keep your finances entirely separate and fiercely protected. Do not let them guilt you into funding their poor choices. And most importantly, do not be afraid of the silence. The silence is your laboratory. It is where you observe their patterns, map their weaknesses, and design your defense. When the time comes to draw the line, do not draw it with a pencil. Draw it with a reinforced steel barricade, and when they inevitably try to cross it, do not explain yourself. Do not apologize, just present the evidence, smile, and let the consequences do the talking. This is Eleanor Sterling signing off from the Sterling Estate. Stay strong, stay silent until it's time to speak, and never let anyone tell you that your boundaries are an inconvenience. Thank you for listening, and remember, the math always catches up.